Okay, so picture this. You're standing next to your best friend, someone you've known like forever since childhood, and he's out there conquering like most of the known world. Now imagine that friend, Alexander the Great, just suddenly dies, leaving like this huge power vacuum. It could just swallow entire nations.
Mhm.
What would you do? That is the situation Ptolemy Soter found himself in. And today, we're going to be uncovering how his choices
Yeah.
led to the creation of a dynasty that ended up ruling Egypt for almost 300 years.
Yeah, it's a story that goes way beyond like just dates and battles. Ptolemy, even though he was Macedonian Greek by birth, he embraced Egypt, the land he conquered, and in a lot of ways, I mean, he became more Egyptian than a lot of the rulers that came before him.
And we're really lucky to have a guide to help us navigate this super complex period. We're going to be drawing insights from an interview with Dr. Toby Wilkinson. He's a leading expert on ancient Egypt, so get ready to uncover some surprising facts.
Yeah.
The kind that will definitely make you the most interesting person at your next dinner party.
I think what's so fascinating is how Ptolemy was there for some of the most important moments in Alexander's conquest of Egypt. Like, he was there when Alexander was declared pharaoh in Memphis. He saw Alexander consult the oracle at the Siwa Oasis. And he even witnessed the founding of Alexandria itself.
I mean, you have to wonder if maybe those events were what sparked Ptolemy's fascination with Egypt. It wasn't just some territory to be conquered. It was this place steeped in history and tradition, a place that just totally captivated him.
Yeah, absolutely. And that fascination becomes really key. When Alexander dies in 323 BC, while other generals are scrambling to grab power, and land across this vast empire, Ptolemy sets his sights specifically on Egypt.
It seems like such a smart move, looking back at it now. But at the time,
Yeah.
was Egypt, was it seen as like a prime piece of the empire?
Well, it was definitely valuable, that's for sure. Egypt's agricultural wealth was unmatched. It was the breadbasket of the Mediterranean, and its natural borders.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
you've got the Mediterranean Sea,
Mm-hmm.
the Red Sea, and the Sahara Desert. It made it very easy to defend. But I guess some people might have seen it as, well, a bit of a backwater, maybe, compared to the bustling cities of Greece or the riches of Persia.
So Ptolemy wasn't just lucky then. It sounds like he had a vision for what Egypt could be.
Exactly. He was thinking long term while everyone else was just focused on quick wins.
Yeah.
And his strategic brilliance really comes into focus when we look at how he secured his position. He knew Egypt would be a target, so he took specific steps to protect it.
Okay, so what kind of steps?
Well, first he annexed Cyrenaica, which is modern-day coastal Libya. And he also gained control of Cyprus. These weren't random conquests. They were very calculated moves to create buffer zones, protecting Egypt from invasion from the west and the north.
So he was proactively building
A defensive front.
perimeter.
Exactly. And this foresight, it really paid off when Perdiccas, another of Alexander's generals, tried to invade Egypt in 321 BC. But Ptolemy was ready for him. He chose the battleground very carefully, using the terrain, to his advantage, and ultimately he repelled the invasion.
Wow, what a powerful statement. It's not only that he secured Egypt, but he also proved himself as a capable military leader.
Yeah, it was a defining moment in his reign.
Yeah.
But there's another event, maybe even more audacious, that really solidified Ptolemy's claim to Egypt. And that's the story of how he acquired Alexander the Great's body.
Okay, this is the part I've been waiting for. This is where the story it gets really unexpected. It's almost hard to believe it actually happened.
Right? It sounds like something out of a movie. So as Alexander's body was being transported from Babylon, probably headed to Macedonia to be buried, Ptolemy intercepts the funeral procession.
He just took it.
Yeah. He diverted it to Egypt in a practical sense. It gave him control of this really powerful relic, something that could be used to legitimize his rule. But it goes deeper than that. In ancient Egypt, burying your predecessor was a symbolic way of claiming their power, their legacy. Ptolemy, a Macedonian Greek, was using Egyptian tradition to bolster his own position.
That's incredible. I mean, he wasn't just a conqueror, imposing his will. He was cleverly weaving himself into the existing power structure, using their own beliefs to his advantage.
Exactly. He was a master of understanding, both the practical and the symbolic, playing the game on multiple levels.
So here's Ptolemy, a Macedonian Greek, ruling over Egypt.
But he wasn't treating it like a conquered land, He was embracing the traditions, even using them to solidify his rule. So how did the Egyptians, react to all of this?
Well, that's where his approach gets even more interesting. He didn't try to erase Egyptian culture or impose some like purely Greek system of government.
Mm.
He understood that to rule effectively, he needed the support of the Egyptian people. So what did that look like in practice? Was it genuine collaboration, or was it more of a calculated strategy to kind of keep the peace?
He was probably both of both,
Mm.
As with most political maneuvers, he brought back officials who had served under the last native Egyptian pharaoh, Nectanebo II. He showed respect for their institutions, their traditions,
Oh.
and their expertise.
So kind of a blend of Macedonian and Egyptian governance. Sounds like a delicate balancing act.
Oh, it absolutely was. And it really shows you Ptolemy's political skills, that he was able to maintain this balance for so long. And in doing so, he laid the foundation for a dynasty that would last for centuries.
But it wasn't all about politics and power, was it? I mean,
Right.
Ptolemy was also known for his patronage of the arts and knowledge.
Yeah.
And this is where we really start to see that that influence of his Greek upbringing, that emphasis on learning and exploration.
You're absolutely right. And it's particularly interesting, I think, when you consider his focus on Alexandria. He poured resources into beautifying the city, restoring temples, and even building new ones, especially temples associated with Nectanebo II.
Connecting himself to a revered Egyptian pharaoh. Smart move.
Yeah, he was a master at weaving these narratives together, but maybe his greatest legacy is the establishment of the Museum and the Library of Alexandria.
Oh, those are names that, echo through history. So what exactly were they, and what was Ptolemy's vision for them?
Okay, so imagine a place where scholars from all over the known world could gather to study, to debate, and to do research. That was the museum. Think of it as like this grand research institute, a precursor to the modern university, maybe. And at its heart was the Library of Alexandria, a collection of scrolls and texts unlike anything the world had ever seen.
It's legendary, It's this, like, symbol of knowledge and learning.
And it was Ptolemy's vision that made it real. He understood the power of knowledge, and he wanted Alexandria to be like this beacon, surpassing even Athens as the intellectual center of the world.
So it sounds like those iconic structures, like the Lighthouse of Alexandria, that we always associate with the city, they came later. But it was Ptolemy who really set the stage for this, like, cultural explosion. He laid the foundation, both literally and figuratively.
Precisely. He understood that true power wasn't just about controlling land or armies. It was about controlling knowledge and shaping the intellectual landscape of an era.
It's incredible to think about the ambition of this one man. I mean, he went from being Alexander the Great's trusted general to becoming the architect of a dynasty and a cultural powerhouse.
And his story's just beginning.
Well, I'm hooked. This deep dive has already uncovered so much, and I can't wait to see where it takes us next.
Me too, yeah. Let's take a moment to kind of reflect on what we've learned so far, and then we'll come back and delve even deeper into the world of Ptolemy and his dynasty. Welcome back. We've been talking about this incredible rise of Ptolemy Isoter, but his story, like any good drama, has layers and layers of complexity. Ruling Egypt, it wasn't as simple as just, issuing decrees. It meant navigating the needs and the expectations of two very distinct populations.
Right, yeah, we touched on this earlier. He had the native Egyptians with long history and, like, deeply rooted traditions, and then this influx of Greeks who came to Egypt, looking for opportunities under the new regime. So how did Ptolemy, like, manage these competing interests?
He understood that brute force wouldn't be enough to create lasting stability. He needed to create a system where both groups felt like they had a stake in Egypt's success. It wasn't about, like, wiping out Egyptian culture, but finding ways to kind of integrate it with Greek traditions and governance.
And we see this in his incorporation of Egyptian officials into his administration.
Yeah.
But were there any areas where he had to make, like, tougher choices, compromises? That might even seem
Controversial today.
well, one example is his relationship with the Egyptian priesthood. They held a lot of power and influence. And Ptolemy knew he couldn't afford to, alienate them. So he made a conscious effort to cultivate their support.
So what did that look like? I mean, was it just a matter of showing them respect, or did he go, like, further than that?
Oh, he went much further. He funded their temples. He supported their rituals. He even participated in some of their ceremonies. Basically, he was endorsing a religious system that wasn't his own.
Wow, that's quite a concession for someone who grew up in the Greek world
Right.
with its own, pantheon of gods and goddesses. It speaks to his pragmatism, I think, his willingness to adapt and even compromise his own beliefs to maintain stability. Exactly. It's a really interesting example of how he blended cultures to strengthen his rule. But perhaps the most dramatic example of this blend of pragmatism and cultural understanding is that story of how Ptolemy acquired Alexander the Great's body.
I have to admit that's the part that I keep coming back to. Is such an audacious move. You have to wonder what was going through his mind when he decided to intercept that funeral procession.
It was a calculated risk, definitely. Alexander's death had thrown the empire into chaos, and his body became this, you know, this potent symbol. Whoever possessed it could claim a piece of his legacy, his authority.
Almost like a relic from a saint in medieval times. You know, a
Right.
source of power and legitimacy.
Exactly, and Ptolemy understood the importance of symbolism, especially in Egypt, where the pharaohs were seen as divine. By bringing Alexander's body to Egypt, he was making a statement, like a bold statement. He was saying, I am the rightful heir, the protector of his memory, the one who will carry on his legacy.
And he wasn't shy about using that symbolism to his advantage.
Yeah.
So, did he give Alexander a grand burial? Something fit for a king?
Oh, he did, eventually. At first, Alexander's body was placed in this temporary tomb in Memphis. But later, Ptolemy had this magnificent tomb complex built in Alexandria, specifically to house the remains of the great conqueror.
Wow, I can only imagine the grandeur of that tomb. It must have become a major pilgrimage site, drawing people from all over, the Mediterranean.
It did. It became this symbol of Alexandria's prestige, its connection to Alexander's legacy. And it served as this constant reminder of Ptolemy's role as the guardian of that legacy.
So we've seen how Ptolemy was a brilliant strategist, a master of symbolism, even like a bit of a showman. But what about his intellectual side? I mean, was his patronage of the arts and sciences, was it genuine? Or was it just another way to kind of, enhance his image?
It's hard to say for sure. But there's evidence that suggests that he was genuinely intellectually curious. Remember, he grew up alongside Alexander, and they both received instruction from some of the greatest minds of their time. I mean, Aristotle was their tutor.
Yeah, that's quite a pedigree. It suggests that that learning and intellectual exploration were deeply ingrained in him.
And his actions kind of support that theory, the creation of the museum and the Library of Alexandria. It wasn't just about projecting an image. It was about actively cultivating knowledge and fostering a culture of scholarship.
It's fascinating to think about what it must have been like to be in Alexandria during that time. It was this melting pot of cultures and ideas, this beacon of learning in the ancient world.
Yeah, it was unprecedented. And Ptolemy's vision played a crucial role in making it happen. He understood that true power wasn't just about military might or, political maneuvering. It was about shaping the intellectual landscape of an era.
Okay, so we've talked about Ptolemy's political savvy, his strategic brilliance, and his intellectual pursuits. But what about the man himself, behind the mask of power? What was he like as a person?
That's always a tricky question when you're dealing with historical figures. The personal side of their lives is often, shrouded in mystery. We get glimpses, of course, through their actions, their writings, and the accounts of others. But it's always hard to separate the man from the myth.
Especially with someone like Ptolemy, who was so good at shaping his own narrative.
Exactly. Based on what we do know, he seems to have been a man of great ambition, drive, and intelligence. He was adaptable, pragmatic, and willing to make difficult choices to achieve his goals.
And we've definitely seen that in his approach to ruling Egypt. He was a master of blending cultures and finding ways to navigate these complex political situations.
And while he was definitely ruthless when he needed to be, he also seems to have been a capable administrator and a relatively fair ruler.
I mean, his reign was remarkably stable.
Yeah.
Especially considering those turbulent times he lived in.
It shows you his ability to create a system that, for the most part, worked. And it's also worth noting that he died peacefully in his 80s, a rare thing for a ruler back then.
So not a bad run for Macedonian Greek.
Yeah.
Who started out as one of Alexander the Great's generals.
Not bad at all. He definitely made the most of the opportunities that came his way and left behind a legacy that few could rival. But let's zoom out for a second and put Ptolemy's story in the context of what was happening in the world at that time. His reign coincided with this period of massive upheaval after Alexander's death, a period that historians call the Hellenistic Age.
Yeah, I've heard of the Hellenistic Age, but I admit I'm a bit fuzzy on the details. So what was it all about, and how did it impact Ptolemy's Egypt?
It's a fascinating period. It's basically the era from Alexander's death in 323 BC. to the Roman conquest of Egypt in 30 BC. It was a time when Greek culture, language, and ideas spread across these huge territories that Alexander had conquered. Think of it as this period of intense cultural exchange, but also of intense conflict.
Right, because Alexander's empire didn't just like peacefully transition into something new.
Mm.
His generals, the Diadochi, they spent years battling each other for control. It was like this giant Game of Thrones
Yeah.
playing out across the Mediterranean world.
That's a great analogy. And Ptolemy was a key player in that game. He had to defend Egypt against rivals like Perdiccas and Antigonus, while also consolidating his own power within his kingdom.
So it was like a multi-layered challenge. He was dealing with threats from both inside and outside of Egypt.
Exactly. He couldn't just focus on internal matters or just external threats. He had to constantly be thinking several steps ahead, playing this delicate balancing act to stay in power.
And he clearly did it well. But what about the other Diadochi? Did any of them manage to establish dynasties that could like rival the Ptolemies in terms of, longevity and influence?
Well, some of them had their moments, definitely. Seleucus and Nicator founded the Seleucid Empire, which controlled a big chunk of the former Persian Empire. And Antigonus Monophthalmus, he eventually became the king of Macedon after years of struggle. But none of their empires achieved the same level of stability or cultural impact as the Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt.
So the Ptolemies were really in a league of their own.
In many ways, yes. They managed to build a dynasty that lasted for almost 300 years and left behind this incredible legacy of cultural and intellectual achievement.
It's amazing to think that Ptolemy's choices and actions not only shaped the destiny of Egypt, but they had ripple effects across the entire Hellenistic world. He was playing on this grand stage.
Yeah.
And he played it masterfully.
He did. And his story is, it's a powerful reminder that history is interconnected, that even seemingly isolated events can have far-reaching consequences.
It makes you wonder, like, what would happen if another one of the Diadochi had gained control of Egypt? Would they have been able to create such a lasting dynasty?
That's one of those big what-ifs of history. It's impossible to know for sure, but it's clear that Ptolemy's unique combination of skills, circumstances, and maybe even a bit of luck played a key role in the Ptolemaic dynasty's success.
So maybe it was this this perfect storm of ambition, talent, and opportunity that allowed him to achieve such remarkable things.
I think that's a good assessment. And his story is this fascinating case study in leadership, ambition, and the challenges of building and maintaining power in a world that was constantly changing.
Before we move on, I want to go back to something we talked about earlier, that fusion of Greek and Egyptian cultures in Ptolemaic Egypt. It's such a unique and fascinating aspect of this period, and I think it deserves a closer look.
Absolutely. It reminds us that that cultural exchange is often a two-way street. The Greeks who came to Egypt, they brought their language, their customs, their beliefs, but they also encountered this, this rich and ancient culture that had a profound impact on them.
So it wasn't just like a one-sided imposition of Greek culture onto the Egyptians.
Not at all. It was a much more complex process and more nuanced, and we see this reflected in everything from art and architecture to religion and language.
Okay, let's break that down a bit. What are some like concrete examples of this cultural fusion in action?
Well, think about the city of Alexandria itself. It was founded by Alexander, a Macedonian Greek, but it was Ptolemy who really, shaped its character. He incorporated elements of both Greek and Egyptian architecture into the city's layout and its grand public buildings.
And we talked about the Serapeum earlier, the temple dedicated to Serapis, that hybrid god who embodied both Greek and Egyptian elements. That seems like a perfect example of this cultural blending.
It is. And this syncretism, this blending of deities, it wasn't just limited to Serapis. We see other examples of Greek and Egyptian gods being combined or reinterpreted to fit within this new cultural context. It reflects this desire to find common ground, to create a shared religious identity for this Hellenistic kingdom.
And what about art? Did Ptolemaic art reflect this blending of styles as well?
Oh, absolutely. Ptolemaic sculpture, it often features this fascinating mix of Greek and Egyptian artistic conventions. You might see a statue with like the idealized muscles of a Greek hero, but it's depicted wearing the traditional headdress of an Egyptian pharaoh.
So they were like borrowing and adapting both traditions, creating something new and unique in the process. What about what about language? Did the two languages coexist, Or was there like a dominant language?
Well, Greek became the language of administration and commerce,
Right.
but Egyptian was still spoken by the majority of the population. And we see evidence of bilingualism in a lot of places, like official inscriptions.
Right.
And even, private letters.
It sounds like a truly multicultural society
Right.
with elements of both Greek and Egyptian culture just woven into like everyday life.
Exactly. And this cultural fusion is, it's one of the things that makes the Ptolemaic period so fascinating. It challenges how we think about how cultures interact and shows the creative potential that can come from these encounters.
Yeah, it's a reminder that that cultural exchange isn't a zero-sum game. Both sides can contribute to this new
Yeah.
and vibrant cultural blend.
I couldn't agree more. And this legacy extended way beyond Ptolemy's reign. The Ptolemies continued to foster this cultural exchange for centuries, making Alexandria this truly cosmopolitan city, a meeting place for people and ideas from all over the Mediterranean world.
It's a legacy that still inspires us today, reminding us of the power of cultural exchange and the enduring human capacity for
creativity and innovation. Well said. It's been an incredible journey so far, exploring the complexities of Ptolemy's reign, his strategic brilliance, his patronage of the arts and sciences, and that fascinating cultural fusion that makes this period in Egyptian history so unique.
And we're not done yet. When we come back, we'll shift our focus to the later years of the Ptolemaic dynasty, exploring the challenges they faced, the internal struggles that plagued them, and the eventual rise of a certain female pharaoh who would become a legend, Cleopatra.
Stay tuned.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Oh.
We've been kind of unraveling this story of the Ptolemaic dynasty. It's a fascinating mix of Macedonian ambition and Egyptian tradition. But as we get into like the later years of their reign, the story gets a little bit more complex.
Well, it's inevitable, isn't it? No dynasty lasts forever. The challenges that Ptolemy navigated so skillfully would eventually catch up to his successors.
So like what were some of the key factors that led to the decline of the Ptolemies? Was it kind of a slow fade, or were there specific events that, sped up their downfall?
Well, one of the biggest problems they had was internal strife as the dynasty went on. Succession disputes and power struggles became more and more common.
Oh, wow. So like
Yeah.
brothers fighting brothers, sisters, plotting against sisters.
Yeah, and ambitious courtiers always scheming. It's like a real-life soap opera playing out on this grand scale.
Yeah, with all the drama and the backstabbing.
It's the stuff of legends, but all that infighting really took its toll.
Yeah.
It drained resources, created instability, and made the kingdom vulnerable to outside threats.
And speaking of outside threats, I'm guessing the rising power of Rome played a pretty big role in the Ptolemies' eventual demise.
Oh, absolutely. Rome was on the rise, expanding its influence all across the Mediterranean, and Egypt, with its strategic location and its vast wealth, was a prize that Rome couldn't resist.
Yeah, they couldn't just ignore it.
No, they couldn't. The Ptolemies were caught between this growing Roman power and their own internal divisions.
So it's like the classic case of a kingdom divided against itself. So how did they try to deal with this growing Roman threat? Did they fight back, or did they try to, negotiate?
Well, they tried a little bit of everything: diplomacy, alliances, even military confrontations. But in the end, they were outmatched by Rome's military might and their ruthless political maneuvering.
And this is where Cleopatra comes into the picture, right? I mean, she's become such an iconic figure, but her story is often surrounded by all this myth and romanticism.
Right.
So what's the reality of Cleopatra's reign, and what role did she play in this final chapter of the Ptolemaic dynasty?
Well, Cleopatra VII was the last active ruler of the Ptolemies. And she was a remarkable woman, forget the Hollywood portrayals. She was a brilliant strategist, a skilled diplomat, and a shrewd politician.
Yeah, she was. She was much more than just a beautiful queen who, seduced powerful Roman generals.
Oh, yeah. She was a force to be reckoned with, and she faced an impossible task trying to keep her kingdom independent in the face of this overwhelming Roman pressure.
Right.
She formed alliances with powerful Romans like Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, hoping to use their support to prevent Egypt from being absorbed into the Roman Empire.
So it sounds like she was playing a dangerous game, trying to manipulate these powerful Roman figures. Did it work?
It worked for a time, but ultimately the odds were stacked against her after Caesar's assassination, and the defeat of Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC Egypt was absorbed into the Roman Empire.
So Cleopatra's reign marked not just the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty, but also the end of ancient Egypt as like an independent entity.
It's kind of a sad end to a dynasty that had ruled for almost 300 years. But it's important to remember that Cleopatra fought really hard to protect her kingdom's independence. She used every tool she had.
Hmm.
She might have lost, but she was a formidable figure on the world stage.
Yeah, her story really highlights the challenges that rulers face when they're trying to navigate a changing world, a world where the old rules are being rewritten and new powers are emerging.
Exactly. And looking back at the whole Ptolemaic dynasty, what stands out to you? What do you think is their lasting legacy?
Well, they definitely left their mark on the world. Alexandria, the city that Ptolemy nurtured and developed, continued to flourish as a center of learning and commerce and cultural exchange for centuries.
Right.
And even though the Muson and the Library of Alexandria were eventually destroyed, their impact on the intellectual development of the ancient world was profound.
Their influence is still felt today. Their patronage of the arts and sciences fostered this vibrant cultural blend that influenced art, architecture, and intellectual thought throughout the Mediterranean.
So from a Macedonian general, seizing an opportunity to the final queen facing the might of Rome, it's been an amazing journey through history.
It has, and I hope our deep dive into the Ptolemaic dynasty has made you rethink your assumptions about ancient Egypt.
Yeah, it's a story of ambition, adaptation, cultural fusion, and the never-ending struggle for power and legacy.
It reminds us that the past is never simple, and that even those figures who seem larger than life were ultimately human, grappling with the same challenges and complexities that we face today.
Well said. And who knows, maybe somewhere in the world today, another Ptolemy is waiting to make their mark on history.
You never know.
I, for one, can't wait to see what the future holds.
Oh.
Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration of history and knowledge.